You mentioned soulmates once.
I have.
Is it just like a spiritual bonus, not very important, doesn't matter very much?
No, I feel it's very important. Very important. In New Age circles, they're called twin flames, yes? Yep. But that's what I call soulmates. Right? Soulmate, your soul is actually one complete unit, which is divided in two when it incarnates. It splits into two halves. And it doesn't mean that the other half is a feminine or say the opposite gender as yourself, by the way. It has masculine and feminine qualities, and the degree of masculine qualities or feminine qualities it has determines who it incarnates into, in terms of a body. So if the dominant soul has mostly masculine qualities, then when it splits into two bodies, it'll split into two males. If the dominant qualities of the total soul is feminine, it will split into two female bodies. If the dominance is a mixture of both, in other words, it has masculine and feminine qualities to a relatively equal degree, then it will split into two opposite genders.
Actually, why is there that inconsistency of manifestation or incarnation in the gender polarities?
How is it inconsistent?
Well, sometimes it's a bit more and sometimes a bit less.
Because the way God created our soul, I'm now talking about the complete unit, not your half, is that it has a huge wide variety of personality and sexuality. So the reality of what God created is that right across the board, we are unique in almost every possible way you could imagine. Right? You're completely unique, including in the soul's expression of its own sexuality. Every single individual is completely unique. Individual soul, remember, of which you are a half. You are half of an individual. And I'm talking about the entire soul. The entire soul is completely individual, unique, and God's created each single one of her children unique. And that's unique across every single quality. So some of you are going to have a great way of experiencing mathematics because God created you with this mathematical bent inside of your soul. Right? Others of you, while you will come to understand mathematics, won't be that attracted to it. Because the other things you will find more attractive. Because God created you with that quality more dominant in your soul. And after a while, when you meet the different people, you start realising, wow, every single person is uniquely created by God. Every single soul, of which you are half, is uniquely created by God and unique in its nature. Now, the problem with that is that we have a wide range of possible sexuality of the soul in its complete unique state, but we only have two bodies to incarnate into, male or female. Can you see? And so what God has done is gone through this process where attraction occurs. So half of the soul gets attracted to a body, whether that body is a physical and a spiritual body. Actually, there's two bodies that each half of the soul gets attached to, a physical and a spiritual body. So if it's the feminine half of the soul and it's dominantly feminine, it will attract two bodies. When you have sex with partner, two bodies, once the genetic code meets, two bodies are created, not one. One's a physical body and the other one's a spiritual body. They both have very, very similar genetic qualities. In fact, in the spirit world, you can actually dissect the genetic code of the spirit body. Just like on Earth, you can dissect the genetic code of the physical body. Yeah? But that's not the soul. The soul is attracted to it, envelopes those bodies, and controls those bodies for a certain time of its existence. Yeah? Are we understanding? Can I just ask, is everyone following that? Yeah. No? No? More knowledge is needed, yes?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're saying. I'm not entirely sure what you're saying here. You're talking about soulmates and that kind of thing.
Let me say more then.
Yeah.
So when God created you, God actually created a soul of which you are one half. And when you incarnated, bodies were created for you by your parents. One half had 2 bodies created for it by one set of parents, and the soul was attached, that half of the soul was attached to those bodies, and the other half had 2 bodies created by usually a different set of parents nowadays, and the soul is attached to those bodies, the half of the soul. That makes that soul and that soul half soulmates. They are physically, spiritually, emotionally, and designed to be connected for the rest of your existence.
That's a bit confronting, isn't it?
Yes. Very confronting. Almost everybody hears that who doesn't understand, who initially doesn't, who's never heard that, finds it very confronting for a lot of reasons, hey? One reason is that you can't actually choose your soulmate. Because your soulmate is the other half of you. Like it's not even a choice. The soul has free will. This soul, the complete unit, has free will, of which you are one half. Far away.
So what if one of the soulmates doesn't desire to meet the other soulmate at all?
Well,
The other soul half.
they can. When you desire, truthfully, to meet the other half of you, you will attract the other half of you into your life.
And what about the earth changes? If the earth changes are coming and we live in different continents?
Makes no difference. The soul is very powerful, much more powerful than you currently realise. You can actually, give me an example with myself and Mary. Because I've had this feeling of soulmates for 2,000 years, of course, when I incarnate, I have a very, very strong feeling that my soulmate's gone. Where is she? Right? And not only that, I have a huge amount of grief about her having gone. So once I realised that I've got all this grief about her having gone, I started processing that grief. I started working my way through how sad I was about missing my soulmate, Mary. Now that process for me started about 8 years ago now, around 8 years ago. It took me 4 of those years of processing emotionally. I was celibate through all of that time. I didn't have any other relationships because any person I was told is my soulmate, I'd go and meet them and go, definitely not the soulmate. Because I can feel the other half of my soul and it's not that person. And sometimes I was told it's the other person on the side of the world, so I go to the other side of the world, check her out. Definitely not my soulmate. Not because I wanted it to be, or not wanted it to be, it was just because I have a memory of Mary that I can feel. Now at this time, Mary was in other relationship, and Mary was overseas. She was living in Lebanon for a period of time, living in Scotland for a while, travelling around the world, and I was in Australia. I'd never travelled at this point around the world or anything like that. I started travelling during this period of time and started talking about the divine truth that I'm teaching you today and all of those kind of things. But I could feel that I still had emotions in me of grief in particular that were preventing my soulmate from being with me. So I had to keep working my way through this grief that I had about the loss of my soulmate. As I did that more and more, I eventually got to the point where I felt very strongly that I would be meeting her soon. Right? And as it turned out, Mary had finished a relationship overseas. She'd got, is it right to say, kicked out of Lebanon? Probably.
Asked very politely.
Asked politely to leave Lebanon. And she decided to come home to Australia. And guess where I was when she came home? I was sitting in her parents' living room talking about the divine truth when I met Mary. Now we were on opposite sides of the world and before then. Right? But your soul is so powerful. And as soon as I met her, I knew. Mary didn't have a clue, of course. when she met me. And I didn't tell her, by the way. I never told her that she was my soulmate. And Mary had different emotions to experience, and I could feel Mary was sad, and so I thought I'd let her work her way through emotions. I never told her that she was my soulmate or anything like that, and other people did that, unfortunately, and we then have another discussion as to what happened. But what I'm illustrating to you is that it doesn't matter where your soulmate is. If you release all the things inside of you that prevent them from being with you, they will automatically be attracted into your life. Whether they have passed or not, they will be attracted into your life, actually.
So can you explain why your grief was preventing me? Because
I had so much grief that to be with me, Mary would have had all of this projected grief upon her. Now Mary has an emotion inside of her where she's very, very sensitive to a male's grief. And she finds it quite repulsive at times, right? As a result of that, if I had not released my grief, I would have continued to repulse Mary from my life. It required either Mary releasing her feelings about a male's grief, or me deciding to release my grief that would cause the attraction. Does that make sense? Now, if one of us, Mary or myself, had chosen to release the thing we needed to release, the other would have been attracted. But if both of us decided to not be humble and release the emotion needed, then we would probably never even have met. Until we passed over the spirit world and then released our emotions eventually, and then we might have met. Now, I don't know about you, but I wasn't too happy about that idea, waiting until we passed before we met. And by this stage of my life, I was definitely not content with having relationships just for the sake of relationships. And I was not content with having sexual relationships anymore without it being with my soulmate. And so that's why I was celibate for that time as well, because I decided I just did not wish to engage myself sexually with anyone else other than my soulmate. And it was those passions and desires that brought us together. And I think Mary freely admits that it definitely wasn't her passions and desires, although there was some passions and desires that Mary also had, by the way, at the same time. So Mary, after a relationship broke up in Lebanon, Mary said to herself and felt for herself that she wanted to meet the person she could be with the rest of her life instead of having serial monogamous relationships.
Have a real relationship.
That were real. She wanted a real relationship. So that's a part of the attraction that brings you together. So Mike, in answer to your question about soulmates, there is a physical other half of you, somewhere either in this earth, or maybe she's already passed or he's already passed. It depends which sexual attraction you have as to which gender it is. And that person is the other half of you, and you have no control over that as to who the other half of you is. Now, that in itself is quite a confronting concept, because it means that you don't even have the choice to select who your soulmate is. They are a person who is just physically the other half of you. It's like separating something and then saying, oh, that's a different person now. That doesn't happen. You're separate physically, but you are actually each the other half of yourself. You can go to...
I was told that my mother is my soulmate that's been blamed. And that's quite hard to deal with. Is that true?
No, it's not true.
Thank you.
What happens with New Age circles is there is a lot of spirit interference on the souls of people on earth that cause them to believe things that are physically and spiritually not possible. It's totally physically impossible for your mother to be your soulmate when you think about it. Because you were conceived by her, and therefore your soul had to be in a unified state at the time you were conceived. So the other half of your soul has to be either a similar age to yourself or around the same age to yourself, not a generation apart. It's very rare to have soulmates that are a generation apart, in fact. The reason why is because the soul has a huge attraction to itself. So each half of the soul has this huge attraction to the other half of the soul. So what happens is, when the first half incarnates or is drawn into its bodies through the law of attraction, the second half wants to incarnate from that moment onwards. Does that make sense? Because of the attraction of the two halves. So usually soulmates are within 5 to 10 years of each other, and it's rare to see them 20 to 30 years apart. Very, very rare. Does that make sense?
Not that rare though. Can it still happen?
Oh, of course it can happen, yes. But it is quite rare. That's right.
Do you believe in the intercession of God in relation to souls coming together? Just through an act of prayer, like, please reveal yourself.
No. The reason why I don't believe in that is because it circumvents the emotions that prevent the soul from coming together. You see, God's not cruel. God just doesn't keep souls apart for no reason, and then you've got to ask God, and then all of a sudden God says, oh yeah, no worries, you've asked now, so I'll put you together. Does that make sense? God doesn't work like that. It has to happen through the operation of emotions that are going on between.
So the desire.
Desire, passion within the two halves of the soul. Yes. God has created that as law, and as a result of that, it's our desire and passion for the other half of our soul that will attract it. Now, the desire and passion is also influenced by our fears. So, for example, if I'm a female and I'm terrified of all males, and my soulmate happens to be male, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think I'm going to meet my soulmate anytime soon? Probably not. I have to release the emotion of the terror of all males before I can actually physically attract the other half of myself into my life. So what God has done with all of God's laws is create this beautiful system that we have to engage true spirituality, not just fake spirituality, or pseudo spirituality. We have to actually truthfully engage the process before something happens. Now, if we feel we've met the soulmate just by going, oh, please tell me who someone is, and somebody's telling it, then it's highly likely that it's the spirit who's engaged the coming together. Spirits have arranged it. Now, why would spirits do that? Because they get their addictions met through arranging things like that. A lot of times, sexual addictions met. So I have actually seen, and you can actually see it, there's people who have even described it to us that they've seen it, where they felt a spirit with them. That spirit with them told them that the other person was their soulmate, and sure enough, they felt hugely sexually attracted to the other person because that person had a spirit with them, telling them about the attraction. And in one case we know of in Australia, the lady and man were actually influenced by spirits who had a relationship 50 years ago, who were separate from each other, and the only way they could consummate their sexual relationship now was by connecting to two people on earth who were open to the connection, and actually have sex through the people. That was the only way they could maintain their relationship. Right? And so these two people, after a few months, realised that they were actually acting completely different from their normal personality, and their normal way of thinking even changed. They even believed themselves to be those people 50 or 60 years ago. And once they realised all that, they started to talk to the spirits involved, and they found out the complete details of their lives and what was actually going on. And the complete details of their life were that these two people came together. One was a Jewish woman who was actually placed in a concentration camp, and the other was a Italian.
She was Jewish Italian.
She was Jewish Italian.
He was a German guard.
He was a German guard in that prison, and he often had sex with her. Initially raped her, and then eventually they had a relationship. And these two people were still trying to act out this relationship in the spirit world through two other people. Right? Once, of course, they found all that out, where do you think the sexual desire went? And once the spirits disconnected from the people themselves didn't feel any attraction for each other. Isn't that interesting? I can tell you many stories like that. It's interesting, Mike just nodded off and that finished that story. It's alright, Mike. Whenever we nod off when we've asked a question, there's a high likelihood you have spirits with you that are causing you to not listen to the answer.
I heard the bit, it's just a bit scary.
Yeah. What happened was that you were starting to feel quite afraid of what I was describing inside of yourself, and that then causes you to detune or separate yourself from staying present, and that then is easily influenced into just nodding off or whatever else after that.
Could you just comment a bit more on, coming back to your emphasis on logic, the word species comes up for me when you're talking about the soul incarnation, and it's just, it's not sitting well with me, this notion that the male and female properties can incarnate in different quantities. To me, there's an irregularity or a lack of order that, to me, the saying, as above, so below, or so below, as above, in the natural world, there seems there's a regulation, which I would have thought the species of the soul would echo. And I wonder if you could say a bit more. Maybe if you could talk a bit about the creation of the soul, the process behind that, and how that comes about. And there's these variables that something's not sitting right with me.
Firstly, can I say that as you deal with different emotions and conditions within yourself and follow the process that I've previously described, a lot of these particular truths will come to you as truths. So you don't need to believe me right now about anything that I'm stating to you. Does that make sense? I'm not asking you to, in fact. What will happen is through your own experience, these truths will eventually become demonstrated to you through your own experience. However, that being said, with regard to this incarnation of the soul, I think the thing you're not quite understanding is the various qualities of the soul, of which there are literally thousands of different attributes and qualities of one soul. And if I can illustrate it in other things other than sexuality, you have different qualities of each soul, each complete unit, has different qualities with regard to art, with regard to science, with regard to all of your conceivable passions and desires. They are all different in quantity in their natural form. In other words, God created soul with personality. Every one of our personalities is unique, so therefore every single one of our likes, our passions and desires is unique in varying quantities. So you might have the same passion and desire of me, but it be in a different quantity. And that's a part, in terms of the natural ability of the complete soul. That same variation applies to the sexual expression between the two soul halves. There's a huge variation there as well, just as there is in every other. And it's the huge variation that creates the different incarnated properties are created by this huge variation. So, the degree of masculinity in every one soul is different to every other soul. The degree of femininity in every soul is different to every other soul. Just like the degree of artistic ability is different in one soul compared to another soul. Just like the degree of scientific ability is different in one soul compared to another soul. Because they are all very, very different from each other, when we incarnate, they are all expressed very differently as a result. Now, with regard to sexuality, or what you call sexuality, I don't really believe in. But I would call it soulality. In other words, my soul has one type of attraction in its pure form, and that is only to my mate, whatever gender she is or he is. That's the only attraction it has in its pure form. It has no other attraction to any other person sexually. It only has an attraction to the other half of myself. in my pure form, not in my addiction form. In my addiction form, I may have attractions in all directions. In fact, many people feel they do have attractions in hundreds of directions. That's why they have promiscuity, is it not? But I'm saying in the pure form, once you've worked your way through things emotionally and released different emotions, eventually you get to the stage where you only have one attraction. And that one attraction is only for the other half of yourself. It doesn't matter to you who it is and what body it's in. You just have an attraction to that other half of yourself. Now, if that other half of yourself happens to be in a masculine body, because of the law of attraction and how it worked in terms of their incarnation, you will be attracted to a male. If that other half of yourself, because the other half of your soul is a male, if the other half of yourself happens to be attracted to a feminine body because of all the different things and the femininity in that part of the soul, your other half, then you will be attracted to a female. You will be attracted to the other half of your soul, whether they're male or female.
I kind of feel like, some other questions, I kind of felt like you didn't answer my question so specifically, but that's okay. A question that came up for me earlier and feels more relevant right now is, how does the free will of your other aspect of your soul affect your unity? So, for instance, if, my other half decided to, make some very bad emotional decisions and was then potentially waylaid for 2,000 years, where does that leave me in my journey?
It leaves you alone for 2,000 years.
Right. Okay. But to me, where's the divine love in that? For me,
well, if you are at one with God, do you think you're going to...
I try to be impeccable with my ways.
Yeah, but if you're at one with God, you don't care about being alone for 2,000 years. You just don't. I have friends that have been alone for 2,000 years.
What about if it was 200,000 years?
Well, that's actually not possible. There's no one in the universe that's been alone for that amount of time.
Right, okay.
There's been some alone for 2,000 years, 3,000 years. Yeah.
But to me, there seems a really poignant injustice in having your journey so...
So you feel you should be rewarded for your actions?
No, I just feel like there's, if free will and true justice to me is that I am sovereign over my actions in totality. I don't have to be reliant on another aspect.
It's a good question. Can I answer it completely? When this half of the soul truly desires this half of the soul, it is very, very hard for this half of the soul to avoid the attraction. They have to be very detuned from any feelings before they can avoid the attraction. Now, usually what happens from a spirit perspective, and what I've seen happen in many of my friends' life in the spirit world, is that where this has occurred, this person has often visited this person and talked to them and done all sorts of things to try to assist them through the process of becoming open to their own half of the soul. And as they do that, they then recognise the other person as their mate. But that process may take a while if the person's damaged their soul a lot. And this is why I'm saying for some it's taken a few thousand years. It doesn't mean they've never actually spent time together. It just means that they can never be at one with each other. They can never be together permanently while this person is in a state of disharmony with love that doesn't allow them to become together. And this is a part of understanding the law of free will. Like, what you do has a huge effect, not only on you, but also on your soulmate. It does. And if we understood that more on this planet, it would be a lot faster before we meet soulmates. If we really understood that, most of us would have met our soulmates by the time we're 10. 10 years of age, on the earth. But the problem with the life currently on the earth is it's not a true reflection of what's possible. Because we're in so much error on the earth, and we have so many belief systems that are out of harmony with love and truth, we actually create situations which are the extremes of what could be created, rather than the norm. It is completely possible for every single person who ever incarnates on the earth to meet their soulmate before the age of 10. On the earth. Completely possible. But unfortunately, under our conditions today, not very likely, because of the amount of sexual addiction that most of us are in. So it's not likely. It's just possible. In the future, I believe it's going to be likely and always occurring. Like most people, by the time they become sexually developed, they will have already met their soulmate. Please don't judge God through what we have created. And that's what you're having a tendency to do. See, what you're doing is you're saying God wouldn't have allowed a system which allows us to create terrible, what seems to be injustice. And I'm saying to you, God has allowed a system that allows you to create terrible injustice even to yourself and the other half of yourself. Now, we don't have to create that injustice. We could make different choices if we had different knowledge. One of the reasons why I want to talk to you today was so that you could have different knowledge, so you create different choices. Does that make sense? So we need to be very careful that we don't judge God for what we've created and then say it's unfair. We need to make sure that we take personal responsibility for what we've created, even if it was unknown at the time we created it. Yeah. Now, if people in the past had followed the principles that I taught 2,000 years ago, you right now would already be with your soulmate. But because people made different choices, they modified what I said and made all sorts of changes. Because of that, the truth about soulmates isn't really known on the earth, and as a result of that, the choices that you made have been different. Now, all we can do is make sure that we actually allow ourselves to change once we know the truth. And I can assure you that if you do that, you will find that God is far more merciful, kind and compassionate than what you currently believe God to be.